Is Iran on the brink of a revolution? In the heart of the Middle East, Iran stands as a nation steeped in rich history and complex modern challenges. The country's journey into political unrest can be traced back to the transformative year of 1979. That year, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah, ending decades of monarchy and established an Islamic republic. The revolution was fueled by a powerful promise to deliver freedom and justice to its people. Initially, the new regime was met with widespread enthusiasm. Iranians of all walks of life imagined a future brimming with opportunity and fairness. However, as the years rolled on, the glossy veneer of the revolution began to crack. The promises of 1979 slowly gave way to a reality of restricted freedoms and unmet expectations. Disillusionment crept into the hearts of the populace, setting the stage for a new era of dissent. But how did the echoes of 1979 lead to the modern waves of protest? Fast forward 30 years to 2009 when the Green Movement seized the world's attention. The backdrop was the Iranian presidential election, a highly contentious event that pitted incumbent Mahmoud Ahmadinejad against his reformist challenger Mir Hossein Mousavi. As the results rolled in, declaring Ahmadinejad the victor by a wide margin, allegations of fraud erupted across the nation. What followed was extraordinary. Millions of Iranians, particularly the youth, poured into the streets, their voices unified by a powerful slogan, "Where is my vote?" This wasn't just a protest, it was a monumental outcry for democracy and transparency, resonating from Tehran's bustling avenues to the quieter streets of smaller cities. The role of social media in this movement cannot be overstated. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook became battlegrounds, tools for mobilization and awareness. For many young Iranians, these digital spaces offered a way to organize, communicate, and amplify their resistance in ways that were previously unimaginable. The world watched in real time a new chapter in activism, unfolding through status updates and tweets. However, the response from the Iranian government was severe. Internet access was throttled, foreign media were banned, and protesters faced brutal repression. Yet, despite the crackdown, the spirit of the Green Movement didn't just dissolve, it embedded itself deeper into the societal fabric. The Green Movement was suppressed, but the seeds of dissent continued to grow. By 2017, economic strain begins to suffocate the Iranian public. In the waning days of December 2017, a wave of protests erupted across Iran, a country already grappling with a volatile economy and widespread dissatisfaction with the ruling elite. The immediate trigger was an abrupt surge in the price of basic food items, a consequence of poor economic management and crippling international sanctions. But the roots of discontent ran deeper, entwined with accusations of rampant corruption and fiscal mismanagement by the government. The protests quickly transcended economic grievances, evolving into a broader critique of the regime. What started in Mashhad, Iran's second-largest city, rapidly spread like wildfire to over 80 cities and towns across the nation. This was no isolated outcry, it was a profound expression of pent-up frustration from various strata of society. Young and old, urban and rural dwellers alike, took to the streets, their chants painting a vivid picture of the national sentiment. The slogans were bold and unambiguous, often targeting not just economic policies, but the political structure itself. Death to the dictator reverberated through the streets, a direct challenge to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's rule. This marked a significant escalation in anti-government sentiment, suggesting a shift from specific economic complaints to a wholesale rejection of the regime. The government's response was swift and severe. Internet access was throttled, a tactic aimed at disrupting the organization of protests and curtailing the flow of information to the outside world. Security forces were deployed en masse, and their crackdown was brutal. Reports of arrests, injuries, and even deaths began to emerge, painting a grim picture of the lengths to which the authorities were willing to go to maintain control. Yet each act of suppression only seemed to fuel the flames of dissent further, highlighting the deep-seated economic and political fractures within the country. The Iranian leadership faced not just a momentary upheaval, but a profound challenge to its authority. The economic woes planted yet another seed of unrest, but the real storm was yet to come. 2019 brought with it the deadliest political unrest in the Islamic Republic's 40-year history. In that year, the Iranian government announced a sudden and steep increase in fuel prices by 50%. This decision struck like a bolt of lightning across the nation, igniting a firestorm of protests that rapidly spread from city to city. The initial spark was fueled by deep-seated frustrations over economic hardships, intensified by the US sanctions which had severely impacted the Iranian economy. The protests, which began peacefully, quickly escalated in scale and intensity. Thousands of Iranians from various walks of life took to the streets, their chants not only decrying the fuel price hike but also demanding broader reforms. The outcry was not just a knee-jerk reaction to economic strain, but a profound expression of a populace weary of decades of political repression. In a bid to quell the uprising and control the narrative, the Iranian government implemented a near-total internet blackout. This drastic measure was aimed at stifling communication among protesters and blocking the flow of information to the international community. Despite this, sporadic reports and videos filtered out, showing large crowds facing off against riot police and the sounds of gunfire echoing through the streets. The human toll of these protests was tragic and extensive. Human rights organizations reported that over 300 people were killed during the unrest, with thousands more injured or detained. The use of live ammunition, tear gas, and water cannons on unarmed protesters marked these events with a stark brutality. Yet, the severity of the government's crackdown did little to extinguish the flames of dissent. Instead, it deepened the resolve of the Iranian people. Each act of violence against the protesters seemed only to solidify their determination, turning what might have once been a flicker of dissent into a blazing demand for change. The brutality of the crackdown only deepened the resolve of the Iranian people. In 2022, a tragic event became a national symbol of resistance. Mahsa Amini, a young woman, passed away under mysterious circumstances while in the custody of Iran's morality police, purportedly for violating the nation's stringent dress code. This incident ignited a firestorm of protests that swept across Iran, transcending socio-economic and generational divides. Mahsa's death was not an isolated event, but a catalyst that exposed deep-seated frustrations among the Iranian populace. The outcry was instantaneous and widespread, as people from all walks of life took to the streets. The chants were not only for Mahsa, but also for the broader injustices perceived under the current regime. The protests of 2022 were distinguished by their sheer scale and the diversity of the participants. Unlike previous movements, these demonstrations saw significant participation from women, leading the charge and symbolically removing their hijabs in defiance of the compulsory dress code. This act of resistance became emblematic of the broader struggle for personal freedoms and civil liberties. The demonstrators' demands quickly escalated from calls for justice for Mahsa to broader appeals for sweeping changes within the government. The people's grievances were no longer confined to economic hardships or isolated policies, but encompassed a comprehensive critique of systemic oppression and the lack of political freedoms. The government's response was predictably harsh, with attempts to quash the protests through internet blackouts, mass arrests, and violent crackdowns. Yet the resilience of the protesters was undeterred, their resolve hardened by each act of repression. The international community watched on, offering words of support for the protesters and condemnation of the authorities' actions, though tangible international intervention was limited. As chants for justice echoed through the streets, the world watched closely. The uprising of 2022 marked a pivotal moment in Iranian history, embodying a collective yearning for a new dawn of governance and societal norms, shaped by the very people who walk its streets. With a history marked by persistent unrest and brutal suppressions, what lies ahead for Iran? As we peer into the foggy corridor of Iran's future, several paths unfold, each etched with its own set of possibilities and perils. The first of these paths could lead to governmental reforms. Faced with mounting internal and external pressures, there's a scenario where the Iranian government might seek to quell dissent through meaningful political and social reforms. This could potentially appease the public demand for greater freedoms and better economic conditions, though the extent and sincerity of such reforms remain a question. On the darker side of the spectrum, further crackdowns could intensify. History has shown us that regimes under threat often tighten their grip, leading to increased surveillance, stricter control over media, and harsher penalties for protesters. This route would likely exacerbate the people's grievances, possibly leading to even more severe clashes between the state and its citizens. Alternatively, we might witness the emergence of a larger-scale revolution. This could be the culmination of years of pent-up frustration and failed half measures by the government. A full-scale revolution would entail significant risks, including widespread violence and instability. However, it could also open the door to radical change and potentially a new political landscape. The role of international pressure cannot be understated, as global attitudes towards Iran influence both economic sanctions and diplomatic relations. Internal resilience, demonstrated time and again by the Iranian people, continues to be a wild card in this complex equation. The spirit of resistance lives on in Iran, as the country stands at a crossroads between repression and revolution.